President Johnson refused the recommendation. This is what he said. You need to write this quote exactly down, because it will be on your test. So President Johnson refused this recommendation from 5 of those 9 members, and this is what he described Mary Surratt's involvement. When they said, well, what about Mary Surratt's involvement? This is what he said. He said that she kept the nest that hatched the egg. So in defending the fact that he refused the recommendation and allowed her to hang, he said that Mary Surratt had, quote, kept the nest that hatched the egg. What's that mean? The egg was bad, and she's the one that tended the nest that allowed that egg to be hatched. She's the one that tended the people that planned the kidnapping and eventual assassination of Lincoln. So he did not take the recommendation, stating that Mary Surratt had kept the nest that hatched the egg. Okay? She was the first woman in the history of the United States ever to be hanged. Ever to be hanged. That's the fate of Mary Surratt and her hanging. Now, I'll give you a little bit of advice if you want. You get bored some night and you really are kind of interested in Mary Surratt.
When were the witch trials?
That was the Blair. That was way back. That was way back.
That's still.
Okay, we weren't.
Oh,
yeah.
Colonies.
There you go. Very good. Very good. You figured out. Yeah, it was the American colonies. Now, Mary Surratt. If you're interested in this, they couldn't hardly find anyone to even defend her in her trial. And this young man decides to defend her and ruins his career. But they made a movie called The Conspirator. If you're bored some night and want to watch that, it's really a good movie on this whole thing. It has everything to do with Mary Surratt. Everything. It's pretty good if you're interested, okay? Now, what about the other people that were hanged? Lewis Powell. He was kind of a big, tough guerrilla tactic type guy, right? His neck was so thick that it did not snap when they sent him through the platform. It took him 8 minutes of hanging by the neck to finally strangle him to death. That would be a brutal death, wouldn't it? So his neck was so thick when they dropped him down, they snapped his neck, which normally breaks your neck and kills you. His neck was so thick that he didn't break his neck, he simply suffocated after hanging there for 8 minutes. Some people would say that. I'll bet the family of William Seward thought that was just about fair. You know what I mean? That was his thing, okay? Now, Dr. Samuel Mudd, who fixed Booth's leg, Samuel Arnold and Michael O'Laughlin, who were only involved in what? Kidnapping part of it. Yeah. Dr. Samuel Mudd, who treated Booth, Samuel Arnold and Michael O'Laughlin, they were just involved in what? Kidnapping plot. They were given life sentences in prison. Life sentences in prison. Samuel Mudd, the doctor? Oh, Arnold. Samuel Arnold.
How'd they know that Mudd treated his leg?
Investigation. Yeah. And Michael O'Laughlin. We're not done yet, though. Now, this is kind of interesting because when Mudd went to trial, he missed out on the death penalty by 1 vote. If one more person in that military commission or military court would have voted for him to be hanged, he would have been hanged. He missed it by 1 vote. He was 1 vote short of being hanged with the rest of those. That's kind of weird when you think about what did he do? He treated the assassin's leg. Okay, now again, whatever. That was really fortunate that Mudd missed the death penalty by 1 vote because he was pardoned by Vice President Johnson on February 8, 1869. So he didn't serve a lot of time in prison, okay? So again, Dr. Samuel Mudd, Samuel Arnold, and Michael O'Laughlin were given life terms in prison. Dr. Samuel Mudd missed the death penalty by only 1 vote, and he was eventually pardoned by Vice President Andrew Johnson on February 8th of 1869. Now this is how this happened. You don't really have to write this down, I just want you to listen. He thought about this and decided that maybe Mudd wasn't quite as conspirator as he was. And maybe all Mudd did was treat a guy that needed treating. So Dr. Mudd's wife, while he's in prison, gets a letter from President Johnson. This is what the letter said. I'm just going to read it to you. You have to write it down. You can get it off the video if you want to write it down. But this is what the letter that Dr. Mudd's wife received from President Andrew Johnson. It said, "Dear Mrs. Mudd, as promised, I have drawn up a pardon for your husband, Dr. Samuel A. Mudd. Please come to my office at your earliest convenience. I wish to sign it in your presence and give it to you personally. Sincerely, Andrew Johnson, President of the United States of America." So he sent her the letter. She then made the trip to Washington and went to the White House. He signed the letter in front of her, and she took it where her husband was then released on March 8th. So he was pardoned on February 8th, but it took a month for the letter to get there to Mrs. Mudd and for her to get to the White House, have it signed, and then get to the jail and give it to him. So he was pardoned on February 8th of 1869. He was released on March 8th of 1869. Well, what did Samuel Mudd do after that? He regained his practice, and he lived the rest of his life on the very same farm that he treated John Wilkes Booth. Pretty interesting. Okay? Got a few more. Samuel Arnold, remember he got a life sentence also, right? We just talked about that. He was pardoned by President Andrew Johnson on March 1st of 1869. He also thought about him and thought, that might be too much of a penalty for what you were doing as planning the kidnapping. So Samuel Arnold was pardoned by President Johnson on March 1st, 1869.
So planning, right? He didn't actually do it, so.
Right, that's correct. But then I think Johnson looked at that and said, yeah, it might have been more. Anyway, after his pardon, he lived a full life. He died at the age of 72. So after pardoning, he lived a pretty good life. Poor old Michael O'Laughlin caught yellow fever, and he died in prison before Vice President Johnson could pardon him. His plan was to pardon him, but he died before the pardon happened. Michael O'Laughlin. So we talked about Mudd, we talked about Arnold, and we talked about O'Laughlin. All given life sentences. Mudd was pardoned. Okay, lived the rest of his life on his farm practicing law. Arnold was pardoned, lived the rest of his life, died at the age of 72. Poor old Michael O'Laughlin caught yellow fever and died in prison before he could receive his pardon. Bad luck. How about Edward Spangler? What did he do? Anybody remember what Edward Spangler did?
Did he get drunk and walk out of the hotel?
No?
Oh, that's the wrong one.
He helped escape.
Yeah, he actually, remember, was supposed to hold the horse
Oh, he's the drunken stage.
for Booth, drunken stagehand. Supposed to hold the horse.
What did the little kid do?
And- Well, that's a good question. He gave the horse to the little kid. Kid didn't get in trouble. So why did Spangler get in trouble? What did he do? Did
He
he
knew what he was doing.
kind of? Well, just listen to this, and then you can write down what you want. He was found guilty of conspiracy and sentenced to 6 years in prison. Spangler was. Okay, he was found guilty of conspiracy in the Lincoln assassination and was given 6 years in prison. And maybe why he got a less sentence is because this is what he got in trouble for. Okay, he slapped an employee at Ford's Theater in the face who had followed Booth out of the theater after the assassination. That employee later testified that Spangler slapped him and said, "Don't say which way he went. Shut up. What do you know about that? Hold your tongue." So he got 6 years in prison for slapping this guy and telling him not to tell anybody which way Booth went.
Huh.
Okay? Now, he also was pardoned prior to serving his 6 years. He was pardoned in 1869 as well. That's when all these pardons happened. Okay? And they pardoned Spangler as well. So he served a couple years, right? A few years. You know what happened to him? It's kind of
Did
interesting.
he return to being alcoholic?
Died of alcohol.
No, he actually got his life straightened around. You know why he did? Because Dr. Samuel Mudd gave him 5 acres of his farmland, and he farmed those acres until he died in 1875. So Dr. Mudd gave Edward Spangler kind of a new life. Now, I kind of fibbed to you. He died at the age of 50 from effects of a long life of alcoholism.
Give him what, 5 acres?
Gave him 5 acres, but he lived quite a while, you know, from 69 to 75, 6 years of pretty good life on that farm, but he couldn't give up the drink totally, and he ended up dying of alcoholism at the age of 50.
He slapped the employee what?
He slapped an employee that was working at Ford's Theater because this employee had followed Booth out of the theater after he assassinated Lincoln, and Spangler slapped him and said, "Don't say which way he went, shut up. What do you know about that? Hold your tongue." Got 6 years for that, was pardoned in 1869, accepted 5 acres of land from Dr. Samuel Mudd of his farm, and he farmed those acres until he died in 1875 at the age of 50. We're missing one. Where's your list? Who are we missing?
Is it John?
John Surratt Jr. What about that guy? What was he involved in? Kidnapping plot. He actually escaped to Canada. And he was in Canada the night Lincoln was assassinated. He wasn't even in the United States. So he fled to Canada. Does that mean we quit looking for him?
No.
Well-
Something about having foreign policies.
No, that's exactly right. Now, he kept running, because when they got close to him in Canada, he went to Europe, okay? And he first went to England, and he hid out in England for a while. Then, when they got hot on his trail there, he moved from England to Rome, Italy, and eventually ended up in Egypt. True story. So he goes to Canada, heat's on, they're looking for him. He fled to Europe, where he started in England. Heat got on, went to Rome, Italy, and then eventually ended up in Egypt, where he was captured and brought back to the United States for trial. Believe that or not. We were pretty persistent, weren't we, in getting all these guys? He's in Canada, let's forget about it. No. He's in England, let's forget about it. No. He's in Italy, let's forget about it. No. He's in Egypt, let's forget about it. No. They finally capture the guy in Egypt and bring him back to trial. Went to trial on June 10th of 1867. Went to trial on June 10th, about 2 years, a little less than 2 years, excuse me, a little more than 2 years after the assassination. He goes to trial.
For 2 years.
Yep, he's on the run for 2 years. Yep, almost. So, he's tried on June 10th, 1867, a little more than 2 years after the assassination. They finally caught him, got him back, put him on trial. He got let go because the jury became a hung jury. 4 jurors voted guilty, 8 voted not guilty. If they aren't all unanimous, it's a hung jury and you go free. So they brought him all the way back and tried him. And after the trial, when the jury voted, 4 voted he was guilty of conspiracy to kidnap the president, and 8 voted that he was not.
But isn't it the country not having foreign policy doesn't, I mean, they can't do anything about it?
No, they wouldn't. They just let him. They let the United States.
Well, would they let them,
Take
the US go in there, but
Sure.
the Canadian government wouldn't do anything about it?
No, I don't think so. Really.
They just-
Now, here's a weird thing. So what's John Surratt Jr. do after he's acquitted because of the hung jury? He later becomes a teacher. He marries and has 7 children and lives a pretty darn productive life. So, as a result of the trial, John Surratt was set free. He later became a teacher, married, and had 7 children. Okay, that's going to take us to our last subtopic, a very short one, the South's reaction to the assassination. How did the defeated South react to Lincoln's assassination?
Oh, pretty happy.
You might be surprised. Most were shocked and saddened with his death. Okay? So, the South's reaction to the assassination. And as you guys were talking about, to the surprise of many, most Southerners were in shock and they were also saddened with Lincoln's assassination. Matter of fact, do you remember Confederate General Joe Johnston that fought in for the Confederacy? When they asked him about it, he said, quote, "We have lost our best friend." I want you to think about that. So most Southerners were shocked. Many, many Southerners were saddened. And even Confederate General Joe Johnston, who fought on the Confederate side during the Civil War, said, quote, "We have lost our best friend." Why? Why were they sad? That's exactly right. His plan for Reconstruction will end up being much more generous than the radical Republicans' plan for Reconstruction. Lincoln planned to treat the South with dignity. The other people are going to treat them like they're a conquered country. And they could see that was going to happen. And they were sad Lincoln was... You know who was sad when President Kennedy was assassinated? Black people in this country were just crying and sad because he was for civil rights, for the rights of blacks. And they knew that, they didn't know, but they assumed that Lyndon Johnson, a Southerner, would not be for civil rights. Turns out, by the way, sneak preview from what we're going to get to, Lyndon Johnson might have been the greatest civil rights president of all times. And he was from the South. But Negroes didn't think that, and they were crying in the streets thinking John Kennedy's death will be the end of any chance of civil rights for us. Turned out not to be true. That's what it is. Okay, here's our story. Tomorrow we will spend the entire period watching a video called Lincoln's Last Day. It's very, very good. And then we will have a review on Wednesday and a test on Thursday. That's how it's going to roll. So you can plan accordingly. Now again, kiddos, please do not come unprepared for the review. If you feel like that you have not gotten the notes properly and you're not up to snuff, make sure that you get on these videos and get them so you know what's happening. The names will be crucial. They won't be matching where you can match them up. You're going to have to write their names down in the fill in the blank.